Welcome to White Pill Radio, the roughly every other episode of Theology on Air, which is an outgrowth of Theology by the Pint, which is a ministry that meets every month in Houston around craft beer, talking about theological and philosophical and ethical and all kinds of interesting issues, political issues as well. So thanks for finding White Pill Radio. Thanks for finding Theology on Air. This is the episode where we talk about current events. We talk about news headlines. We say that this is post-apologetic, ultimately hopeful, applied theology that does look indeed at these news and current events with a Christian worldview. I like to say that this is
blessed talk, not happy talk.
No happy talk here. Straight talk, the real deal, and no meaningless gab. That's what I'm going for here. So we got a lot to talk about. Who is with us today? Well, as almost always, Sarah Stone graces us with her presence once again, fresh off of last night, our Theology by the Pint event on Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalist rally, yes.
Oh my gosh,
Stone, yes.
No, it was not.
But she is the grand poobah of Theology by the Pint, which has a website.
Yeah, it's aptly named Theology by the Pint. Anything you want, com, org, net.
US?
I don't know.
.gov?
There's lots
not
of
.gov.
there's
We're
lots
not
of,
taking over the government yet.
There's lots of domain endings out there these days. But
theologybythepint.org.
Yes, and find out
/
everything you want to
give.
know.
I mean, if you want to.
Got some cool fundraisers coming up, cool events.
Yeah. Let's say something about one of those. Excuse me. If you live in the Houston area and you like burgers or truffle fries or beer or just supporting a great nonprofit, on July 18th, you can come out to Hop Dottie in the Heights. And anything you order, if you give them our flyer, and we'll have it on the website, they'll give 20% of it back to us.
Cool.
So get a burger and a beer and support us. Easy.
And Austin Freeman. Fan favorite, we might say.
We might say.
I don't say that. Y'all can say that.
And that's his real hair, in case you're asking, for those who are watching on YouTube.
Also announced as such to a room full of people at the event last night. I am a professor of apologetics and theology at Houston Christian University. I am the author of Tolkien Dogmatics and many other works of theology and fantasy. And the opinions expressed are not necessarily the opinions of Houston Christian University unless you like them, in which case they are, and you should come and study with us.
Every time? You're going to do that every time?
That's my catchphrase.
Okay. It's not a phrase, sir. It's like catch paragraph.
I mean, probably the lawyer for the university was like, Austin, bro, you got to put out this disclaimer.
Every time.
Look, I want to try to not get in trouble, but also still benefit.
Absolutely.
That seems like a totally
opportunist.
reasonable. Yeah, it seems like a totally reasonable position.
Seems reasonable to me.
Totes.
All right, let's jump in. We have a lot to talk about,
Okay.
and I'm going to pledge we're going to get through it all. I don't know if you know this or not, but June has become what's called Pride Month, and it is
I hadn't heard of it.
Yeah, it's where we celebrate one
Not
of the
in the
seven
Middle
deadly
East.
sins. Yes, not yet. Not on their Twitter logos or anything. Anyway, but yes. So there is, I think, a kind of notable backlash against this. There is frustration. There was the Dylan Mulvaney thing last year. But now there are these, symbols are important for those of you who, I don't know, are into things like, liturgics. There are religious symbols that are important. And the rainbow flag, the progress flag has become a symbol. And now it's sort of being etched in stone. It's being increasingly unfurled and placed in certain
Enshrined.
public places, yes. And they're becoming like permanent. They're not just like during June. So one of the things that has been happening in some cities, you have these progress flags or whatever we're calling them, like on streets. Mm-hmm. And there are some people who are saying, you know what, that's my street too, and I don't want that. I don't agree with that. I'm not here for pride. And so they've been skidding on it. And there was one really interesting story where these kids had rented scooters, these little electric scooters. They had skidded on this thing, and
doing donuts kind of thing.
Yeah. But I mean, how much can you do with an electric scooter? What's really crazy is that the company, I think it's called Lime, they literally basically put a prohibition on the scooters being able to go over that area. So I don't know how they GPS it or coordinate it or something, but like which is like the future of like, this is why we don't want cars that can be programmed from afar, right?
Yeah.
So the self-driving car is great until it doesn't let you go to church anymore because Christians are hateful bigots. So that's like a Black Mirror episode all wrapped into one. So that was interesting. Meanwhile, contrast that this last week, there was a major demonstration, a Free Gaza, pro-Palestine demonstration in Lafayette Square, right by the White House, where a statue of the great Lafayette was defaced and spray painted on, and all kinds of slogans were spray painted on these. Yet another demonstration of our national monuments being defaced, and there is no penalty for that. So, to be clear, it is a felony in America, a felony, a hate crime, not a misdemeanor, a felony hate crime if you do skid marks on a pride flag, which, by the way, is on the road where vehicles drive.
Yeah. So
what do you expect? I mean, I'm not saying that defacing it is to be expected per se, but you can tear down national monuments, and there seems to be no outrage except from, the right.
If you watch the video of the park ranger standing there and having all of the bottles and everything thrown at him, you can tell he knows he's given up.
Yeah.
Aww.
He is so resigned to just standing there and being humiliated in front of this monument. He knows he cannot do anything about it, or he will be the one on the line.
Yeah.
That was the most pathetic thing about all of this to me, is watching that one single park ranger just die on camera.
Yeah.
Metaphorically.
Crime is something that it doesn't have to be this way. That's one of I think that's one of the sad realities of urban living, is that there is a sense, I think people are getting resigned that this is just the way it is. That in cities there's just decay. There's that rot is inevitable, that bad policies are inevitable, that endless shoplifting is inevitable, that increases in crime, that homelessness, drug addiction, open drug use, all it's just inevitable. It's not. It doesn't have to be this way. There was a story. It wasn't
this way 5 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah. There was a story. I'm not going to go through the whole. If you don't know what's going on in El Salvador, if you didn't watch maybe Tucker Carlson's interview with Nayib Bukele, you're kind of behind the times, because that is the future. But no, I mean, for real, like what he is doing is nothing short of like absolutely remarkable. He took one of the most dangerous countries on earth and made it one of the safest countries on earth. It should be the model for everyone, but he is vilified by the left still to this day. Which kind of tells you something. Like, there are people who actually don't want countries to become safe. It's really weird, but that is actually seems to be the case. But there was a story the other day where 3 gang members, because MS-13 is outlawed. It is illegal to be in MS-13 or to display those signs. Like, there are 3 gang members spotted in a neighborhood, and 2,000 troops, like, rolled in to go find these 3 guys. It was... Now, obviously, people say, oh, totalitarian, oh, authoritarian. Well, as we talked about last night with Christian nationalism, there are certain authorities. There are good authorities. And sometimes I want certain authorities to do certain things. And one of the things that I would like authorities to do is protect the innocent and punish the guilty. In fact, that's like the one job of the state. And so what is so frustrating about this what seems to be a new civil religion, where pride flags are hung from our White House, where they're painted on our streets.
They're flying at every hospital and every civic.
Yes. Yeah, the VA. It's a hate crime if you do anything to it, but you can burn the American flag. That's protected speech. How did this happen? It's a rhetorical question. No one needs to answer that. But
well, and just on a lesser level, I mean, this isn't as big a deal as what you're talking about, but just the sort of fading respect for beauty and the office of, like, I remember my mom even being upset years ago when Barack Obama did an interview and they asked him if he wore boxers or briefs. And she was like, why would we ask our president that?
That is so gross.
I mean, but now everything is cute and fun and casual and we have lost respect for. I mean, I talked about this when the whole "Let's Go Brandon" thing was popping off, because I said, even though I can't stand Biden, there is something about yelling chants like that are just so childish.
Yeah.
And the same idea with you when you have a monument of various different leaders who have done great heroic things. There's just an implicit respect that I feel like I grew up with that people now are not growing up with. If you don't like it, you can smash something on it.
Right.
And
the Let's Go Brandon thing and its less charitable alternative.
Yes.
I think, though, that was a response to this feeling of powerlessness that people have, that nothing is done about actual crime.
A two-tier justice system.
A 2-tier justice system, or a 3-tier justice system, in which certain people, like, say, the former president, who was targeted specifically, So it's like, we hear these things. I mean, one of the articles we didn't, maybe we won't talk about, but we should mention was, Hunter Biden is found guilty of 3 kind of small gun crimes. Meanwhile, like, there are those who allege that he is actually involved in selling influence, with 20 LLCs with his uncle and his father. They have no basic, skill that they're marketing to the world, but they're marketing influence. They're literally peddling influence and making millions of dollars doing it. Like, that's the actual crime that we should be going after. But instead, there are these kind of Picayune gun rules. And anyway, there is a great sense of frustration. I think that certain people are sort of truly above the law. Certain people are under the law. And this just is kind of a reflection of it. But I will say that there have been some, pride parades. There are these stories that kind of pop up. I don't maybe watch enough media to know. Is it as ever present as in the previous years?
No,
in terms
I've
of
seen barely anything.
About what? About pride stuff?
Yeah.
I don't think you're following the right things.
Maybe I'm not.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of parades and.
Well, there's going to be parades, but I'm thinking of like
coverage,
I'm thinking of like the corporate
hype.
sponsorships. I'm thinking of like gay Skittles. That did happen. I'm thinking of.
Haven't they always been gay?
Well,
I'm just kidding. Keep going.
now that you mention it,
Or Star Wars.
Well, yes, the acolyte. Anyway, but that's not really related to pride. So I mean, the question is like, is pride going to? I guess one
dying?
question is it dying? Like, was 2022 or 2023 peak pride, and it's on the way down? I kind of think it might be. If you look at data, the younger people are like fewer people. It's not a lot, but fewer people are sort of pro gay marriage. They're pro transgender. Like, the numbers seem to be decreasing, and so I think maybe that's a good thing.
Well, there's anecdotal evidence. I haven't looked at any numbers to see whether this is true or not, and I've spoken to LGBT friends that have said that they don't think this is true. But there's anecdotal evidence, at least in my experience, that the LGBT are all sort of going their own direction, right? That the T is sort of ruining things for everybody else. The LGBs kind of want to go back to the way that it was. And I mean, if you look at the flag itself, the rainbow is quickly getting smaller and smaller. It's getting pushed off the side of the flag. So I think that what now, because of the Overton window, seems to be the more traditional wing of the LGBT movement, are trying to have a nice, quiet pride at home.
Sorry.
And
like the olden days.
Yeah, I don't see as much. I don't see as much this year. Which is interesting. I think that there was such a huge blowback from last time, and there's such a huge blowback, we'll talk about this later in the show, towards the horrors of the transgender movement, that people are just not in for it. And the corporations, which are the ones that drive this whole thing anyway, the corporations are rightly going to, they'll change their logo, but they'll probably stay quiet the rest of the time because they don't want to rock the boat. They're still trying to decide which side they want to jump onto, unless they are in the Middle East, in which case.
Right.
Did you see this conversation of somebody called out Mercedes-Benz, I think it was?
It was multiple companies. Cisco is another one. Yeah, the Twitter logos for America were one thing, and they're all turned to rainbows.
And it's every year. It's not like this is a new thing, but they responded. I think Mercedes actually responded.
Yeah, they did.
They said, we have different standards based on countries' laws and cultural context. I'm like, well, what's our cultural context?
Right.
Yeah, interesting.
That's the whole question right now, I think. And again, I think it's not a good argument to say, well, only a certain number of people are LGBT, because we can see that number is wildly fluctuating today because it's something of a trend among young people today.
A social contagion, might we say?
We might. But, in the 50s, for example, 1% of people were gay. So if it really is this like natural inborn thing, then that would still be true, forever. But I don't even agree with that number or the way that is phrased. But even taking that, we're talking then about a very small percentage, well under 5% of all people, pushing this onto the public square, pushing this into, our way of life, and calling Christians bigots and hateful and all of that if we don't celebrate it. And, I have in-laws in Kansas, and my without giving too much away, my mother-in-law is driving far distances to go to a Methodist church that is not, down with the progress flag. And I warned her this day would come. And it's frustrating. I don't know what I was going to say about that.
Well, I went to the doctor the other day, and she had on a pride flag pin and a Black Lives Matter pin, and I thought, like, I don't really have a choice about whether I'm going to receive health care from this person. She's my doctor. But I thought if the roles were reversed and I had a pin that said like, I vote Republican, right? Or I am a Christian and I think that's the one true religion or something.
Yeah.
People would be so up in arms. Like, just when you take healthcare from someone or you have a bank teller or whatever, you're on the receiving end of the service. It's almost like you're saying, yep, we're all in this together and we all believe the same thing. It's kind of bizarre. Anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know what the white pill is there other than...
well, the white pill is, I hope that we've had peak pride, that that these kind of burnouts and donuts on this street, it's a kind of visceral reaction. And for those listening to the recording, we have another event going on at the church. So if you hear something in the background, apologies. But there is
a lovely children downstairs having fun.
Yes, I do think there is a kind of visceral reaction to say, you know what, this is our space too, this is our street too, these are not our values, stop. And I will say this, pride is, if not already, and this would be obvious to you, but maybe not to everybody, it is the establishment. Mm-hmm. Right.
What do you mean when you say that?
Well, it's the norm. It is pushed by all the institutions. It has become. It was once subversive, right? It was once the subversive idea, and now it is the oppressive idea. Mm-hmm. And it is the people making the donuts on the mural in the street that are the people being subversive.
Yeah. So the
questioning the narrative.
The minority position has switched.
Yeah.
But I think that leads us into this next article here.
Let's do it.
Those of you that have been following the European Union elections, which I'm sure is all of you, far-right gain. This is Associated Press. Far-right gains in the EU election deal, stunning defeats to France's Macron and Germany's Scholz. And this was echoed all across the board, almost in every European Union country. There have been huge gains among what the Associated Press are calling far-right parties.
Quote unquote.
Yeah, quote unquote. Now, I'm not an expert in European politics, but there are some good things and some bad things about what's going on here. The good thing is it seems like Europe has finally started to say, we've had enough of this mass immigration. We've had enough of police refusing to do things. I mean, back in 2016 or 2017, there was literally a government cover-up in Germany on New Year's Eve. Have you heard about this?
No.
Well, so exactly. So back,
it was covered up.
It was several years ago. This was back during the Syrian crisis, when Germany accepted their first huge batch of refugees. Something like over 1,000 women reported being sexually assaulted on New Year's Eve in public spaces and squares all over Germany.
Oh my gosh!
All of them reported that the assaulters were Middle Eastern, and the press and the government that made those announcements deliberately did not mention that fact. They said that these were, they suppressed that part of the narrative deliberately. Now we could say, bravo, skin color shouldn't matter. We shouldn't be judging people based on the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And I would agree with that statement. But other people pushed back and said, if you look at what's going on in Egypt, there is actually a culture of mass public rape that happens in places like Cairo. And these are the people that are now coming into Germany. There was somebody elsewhere in Europe that was recently released from assaulting a young girl because he said, well, in Romani culture, this wouldn't be considered assault. And so he was exonerated. There are particular cultures that do not have the same regard for women as has traditionally been held in Western Europe. And it seems as if the takeover by Islamic non-assimilationists groups, mostly male, mostly fighting age, as people have finally just started to say enough. And to the extent that Emmanuel Macron has decided to dissolve their legislature and call for snap elections. That he has said basically the government no longer has faith in me, and this is traditionally what happens when. Now, that's a good thing in my view. That's a white pill. That this is a dangerous situation. Not that immigration is bad, but that particular sorts of immigration where you literally have people on camera in the streets of London, as they did yesterday, walking down in bulletproof vests saying that we want Zionist blood, while the police just watch and do nothing.
Jeez.
That's bad, right? That has happened in Europe before. We don't want that to happen again. The downside is some of these people that the Associated Press are calling far right actually are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
there's a few crazies mixed in.
And so one of the people that was just elected to the European Union Assembly was a guy that is on camera walking into a place and taking a fire extinguisher and spraying a menorah and putting out the candles on a menorah. This too is bad. We have seen this happen in Europe, and we should not want this. But this guy now has a seat in the European Union legislature. So the very same impulse that is causing people to say we've had enough can also, because they've been so repressed, bleed over into more radical and unsavory forms of action.
Yeah.
So far, maybe a lot of positives to look towards in Europe, but maybe also something to keep our eye on and be worried about.
But understand that when they say far right, I mean, that phrase itself
It's lost meaning.
is so gaslighting, it's so gaslit. It means nothing. They want you to think Nazi, but it basically means Bill Clinton. I mean, it really does. I mean, the what is considered far right now is so crazy. I documented this at one in an essay I wrote a while back, and it's just like you just look for that phrase and you see it everywhere, and it's just normal stuff.
Hey guys, Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much, and now back to our show.
Normal stuff. I mean, like believing you should have a closed border, believing that you should have a balanced budget. These are far right ideas. It's crazy. So I hope our readers, our audience, will at least have the critical thinking skills, or they have the skills, but put them to good use. That whenever that phrase is used, don't just believe it. Really question what far right even means.
Yeah, it's politics by labels nowadays.
Unfortunately,
thought killing labels.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask you a question, though, when it comes to, and maybe we save this for another time. Tell me if you want to put a pin in it. But this idea of non-assimilating, you talked about Islamic non-assimilating groups, especially young fighting men, age men. That idea of assimilation is interesting because that's where we get scared around like mass immigration when we get, say, a bunch of, say, like Muslim people immigrating. If they're not assimilating, that's when we get scared. But what does assimilation look like? It doesn't look like losing yourself or losing your culture.
No, assimilation does not look like monoculture.
Right.
You can have a pluralistic society, but you have to have, at the bare minimum, some sort of founding governing principles by which a nation functions. And France has a constitution, has a historical culture that is based in Western values and Christian values. Or, believe it or not, France used to be Christian. When you have immigrants that say, we don't really care anything about the history or the context of the place that we're coming, we only want to bring the values of the place that we have come from. Well, sometimes they're compatible and sometimes they're going to come into conflict. And that's what we're seeing here, is that the picture of how the world works in the Muslim world and in the Western post-Christian world are so radically different that there is going to be conflict.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by assimilation, is not that we should all look the same or dress the same or believe the same, but we should all at least be on the same mission in terms of what it means to be a body politic.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the case with the mass Islamic immigration that we're seeing.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the difficulties in our political moment is that few people are willing or able to look at, cause-on, knock-on effects or secondary or tertiary consequences. So people will say, we need more laborers, import them. Okay, but what is a secondary effect of importing laborers? It could be that they don't assimilate. It could be that you're importing the worst from that country. And anyway, and so I think that like there can be something that could be like a good, but then it has consequences that you don't think about, you don't think through, that produce bad things.
Right.
I mean, I think that's exactly what's going on in our country right now.
Well, the good is we want to protect people from having to flee their country from political violence or persecution or oppression. We want to welcome people in. That is a good thing.
Yeah.
And this situation is so complicated. We're not going to. If we could give a pot solution in 30 seconds, we wouldn't be in the place that we are.
Sure.
But we're talking about general trends here, and the desire to want to help, which in itself, by the way, is a product of historical Christian worldview. The value of pity and looking after the least of these is something that has now, paradoxically, in the post-Christian West, meant that we now roll over and allow ourselves to be manipulated by other people who are taking our good impulses and manipulating them into something else. I mean, there are places in Ireland and in the Mediterranean islands that are just overwhelmed. Like their population, the people whose home this is being colonized.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there are no-go zones. That was a controversial book written by Raheem Kassam, where he talks about how there are many parts of Europe where the police don't even enter. There is no policing. So Sweden has become one of the most dangerous countries in all of Europe. Sweden? Really? Sweden?
The IKEA, the IKEA country?
Yeah, that's the one. They make Volvos or whatever. I think there. The large, we had an event about Christian nationalism. Nationalism is happening in all of these places. Yes. There is an Irish nationalist movement. There is a French nationalist movement. There's a German nationalist movement, and good for them. There is nothing wrong with saying this is our nation. We want to protect it. This is how we define it. There is nothing wrong with that. And for the media and the left to basically say, well, you're a Nazi, that's a claim that we just have to simply reject and really roll our eyes at, because not everyone's a Nazi. So, but let's keep going because I said we we're going to try to get through everything. So
let's do it.
There was there's sort of two stories that I thought kind of went together. Speaking of the trans movement. One was a story that Christopher Rufo put out on the City Journal, where he noted that a surgeon at Texas Children's Hospital by the name of Ethan Hyam was arrested, basically at gunpoint, which is how we do it these days, by the Department of Justice, by federales, if you will, by the feds, for supposedly HIPAA violations, the personal act,
the thing everyone signs but never reads. Yeah.
Yes. Because he was a whistleblower at Texas Children's on the transgender
gender
affirming care and the puberty blockers. They were all into that. And then they kind of the new CEO the CEO said, no, we're not going to do that. But he basically said, no, they still are. And so he was arrested for this. And so that's a pretty much a black pill moment. So we'll see what happens with his story. I know he's raising money for his legal defense, but that was concerning. By the way, I mentioned, I think it was the last episode, where I knew someone that went to a certain hospital and they temporarily sort of lost the ear of their child on this issue. And you made a joke was it Memorial? Do you remember that? And I was like, no, because it wasn't them. It was Texas Children's. And now that they've essentially done this to Ethan Hyam, I have no problem saying that. It's a national story now. So Texas Children's, is on board with the transgender movement. At least they were, and giving kids puberty blockers and all the damage that might do. But the white pill is that there is a movement. Their website is Doctors Protecting Children. It's like a pediatric organization. I came across a speech that they did. This is the no, I'm sorry. I should know this, but I don't think I printed it off. But go to Doctors
American
Protecting
Association
Children.
of Pediatrics, I think, right?
Thank you. Yes, the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Academy.
And so they, let me just read some of what they say, some of their statement. Therefore, given the recent research and the revelations of the harmful approach advocated by WPATH and its followers in the United States, we, the undersigned, because they're asking people to sign this as a petition, call upon the medical professional organizations of the United States, including the American Academy of Pediatrics. Therefore, I might be wrong about who is saying this. Apologies. The Endocrine Society, the Pediatric Endocrine Society, American Medical Association, American Psychological Association, and others to immediately stop the promotion of social affirmation, puberty blockers, even social affirmation, right? That's before the medicine. That's before the, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries for children and adolescents who experience distress over their biological sex. So like we talked about, there could be kind of peak pride was maybe a while back. This could be an indication, could be kind of just tip of the spear motion where there are medical professionals who are now willing to come out and say, this is not helping children, this is harming children, and we want people to sign this, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a good thing.
That is exactly what we needed. If you read literature from people that are medical insiders, they say that the WPATH and all these other things that are saying, well, this is the agreed upon opinion of the leading medical associations. It's not. It's a few people who happen to have the political power in these associations and who are ruling by fear and suppressing the voices of anybody that disagrees with them. And if you dare to speak up about it, you might be suspended, you might be kicked out of the association, you face consequences. So it's a small contingent of medical professionals who are radicalizing and ideologizing the medical field. And good for these doctors for standing up and saying that there's actually hard science behind what it means to be a man or a woman. And this is not the only place that I've seen this happen. When William Thomas, or Leah Thomas, the male swimmer who won all of these awards and has been in the news quite a bit, was denied the ability to participate on the U.S. women's swim team.
For the Olympics.
And I think that's a huge victory. We need more doctors and more associations standing up and saying we need protected spaces for women, and we need more female athletes to stand up.
This
and
would
say,
be
we're not
another.
gonna have this.
This would be another example of the secondary thinking. Both of which, in both cases, women end up being the victim. Which is the good is that there are people that have this condition of gender dysphoria, and the good would be we are encouraging and helping them to find their true self. I mean, that's what is said. I don't agree with that, but let's just say that is the good that they are looking to do. What are the secondary effects? What are the other causes? Well, people can hide behind that and go into women's locker rooms. They can compete in women's sports. They can harm women. They can rape women.
Yeah.
They still are predatory at the same rate as male-identifying males, by the way.
Yeah.
According to statistics. So transgender, I always get it mixed up. It's so confusing.
The last word you say is the thing they want to be.
Okay, so transgender women.
Yes, so born men.
Sexually offend at the same rate as non-transgender, which is why women are like, I don't care if you're in my locker room and say you're a woman. Like you're still
just as likely to
assault me as a man.
Yeah.
Well, and then they go to women's prisons and horrifying things happen there. I mean, you've read articles about that.
I think we might have even touched on that.
Horrifying.
I mean, it's so insane. I don't even know where to start with it. I'm out of words with all of it. It's just so devoid of reality.
I think we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here. Europe has already shifted.
Yeah.
Right. So again, it seems like we're catching up. It used to be that we were several years behind Europe, and now we're just a few months. So the far right, quote unquote, move in the EU, but it was months and months ago that they started closing down the child gender clinics. Even in Sweden and these other places, and saying we're sorry, but this is harmful.
Yeah.
So if Europe is doing it, it seems like America is now starting.
Maybe they'll start shutting down the euthanasia clinics pretty soon. But when we talked last time about like the fact that this is a kind of social contagion in the way that anorexia was, like once you give a name to it, other people think they have the problem, and so that's obviously what we're going through because you don't see these spikes and people identifying as trans like for no reason. It's a pathogen that's like working its way through the society.
Celebrity families that have 3 children that suffer from it. Yes.
Right. Thank you, Charlize Theron. And who's that? Megan Fox. Like
all of them.
Yeah. No, but like the thing about it is that when it goes, I think it'll go fast. Because there's nothing actually there. It's all ephemeral. Like it's all fake. Like it's not. There's nothing about it rooted in reality. And I think it's a fad that when it goes, like there will be a tipping point where like it'll become unfashionable quickly. That's my hope anyway.
I love all this optimism. I wish I was there. I hope you guys are right. I see this as one of the like primordial confusions of the enemy. And so I don't see it going anywhere, but I hope I'm wrong. That would be amazing.
It's not going to disappear, but the level of prevalence that it has in society, the level of visibility can go up or down. And you're right, Sarah. Like historically, this has always been the case. We see this trotted out during Pride Month every year. The historical vignettes about various people that were transgender back in the 1920s or whatever, as if that proves anything. Talking about the Greeks and all of that. But the fact of the matter is, there have been societies that are more depraved than ours.
Oh, for sure.
Right. When the New Testament was written,
Yeah.
there was a lot of worse stuff going on than anything that's currently going on in the United States.
We only see it as so depraved because we've been enjoying this Christian culture for these
cut
centuries.
flower society.
Yeah.
Cut
Explain
flower
that.
society.
Explain that.
So the cut flower society is when you cut the flower out of the field and you put it on your vase, it will survive for a standard period of time, and you can make it seem to survive longer by doing particular things to it. But eventually the flower will wither and die because it's been cut away from the source of its life.
Yeah.
And so the analogy is when you sever a society from its root or grounding in the Christian story, then it will continue to go on and look as if it is alive for a little while, but eventually it's going to die.
Yeah. Well, Sarah,
Okay, I don't know how to segue.
there's
from that.
I don't know either. Yeah.
But so
There are connections because
I'm sure there are
There was
connections.
that pride parade.
well, the East versus West thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, we've been hearing since October. So October 7th, of course, was the horrifying attack from Hamas. All of the Israeli people that were killed, raped, and then all of the hostages taken, including 5 American hostages, which are still there. Anyway, but since then, we've been hearing, in the first couple of days, people were horrified. And then pretty quickly, there was this weird social dynamic that happened, especially in Western countries.
When Israel actually started doing something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That somehow we had to be on the side of Hamas and the Palestinians, and people say, no, those are 2 different groups, which they are. Hamas is the terrorist group, and the Palestinians are the people living in Palestine, some of which are really behind what Hamas does, and some of which aren't. But I think that the narrative over the many months has become the Palestinians are all these sort of poor, innocent people that they have nothing to do with Hamas, and why is Israel coming and attacking them, and Israel is so mean. And of course, Israel, by the way, was just sitting there minding its own business when, the attack happened and their people were slaughtered. And it was so awful. I think people forget that Hamas had a rape captain that was just in charge of making sure enough people were raped, and they were all hooked up on crazy drugs. I mean, the whole thing was just so evil. Anyway, and I have been sort of the burn it down person on this show, and I feel like I'm getting a little bit of validation or vindication here because the narrative at least has had a couple of holes poked in it. As you may have heard in the last few days, Israel did this really sneaky, cool, almost like a heist extraction of 4 hostages. 4 hostages, 1 female, 3 males, made it out alive. Noah, that's the lady. She was in a lot of the footage that we saw from October 7th.
She was on the motorcycle. Yeah.
From the music festival. And she's pretty and young. So, that was especially sort of jarring optics. But anyway, the 3 men were being held at one house. The woman was being held at another house. Israeli troops basically posed as Palestinian refugees, and they were traveling with mattresses and a bunch of stuff, saying they'd found a place to stay. And they had to do this very precise attack at the same time at both locations, lest one location tell the other, and then they slaughter the people in the other location. But the hostages were saved, and it's heroic and amazing. And of course,
of them were saved,
Americans, even if you look up the stories of the hostages being saved, you'll see news titles that are like, it's a darn shame the way that all went down. People were killed. Yeah, people were killed during war as we saved hostages that were taken by these people. Anyway, but the holes poked in the narrative is this. These hostages were all being held by civilians. Civilians who aren't just former military, now civil. No, civilians who are, one of them is a photojournalist for Al Jazeera. Now, he wrote for Al Jazeera, but he actually was a journalist for various publications. But the point is, he's an artist. He's a creative, as we like to say. And it looks like many of the people in this city, in this town, knew what was happening and were complicit in this. For how many months now have they had these people hostages in this region, in these families? And so I know all of the news articles talked about how, well, this is so terrible. I think it's amazing that Israel got these hostages out. I think it's awesome. I am not sad that Hamas operatives died in them being rescued. I mean, anytime a life is taken out, that's obviously a sad thing. But meaning in war, this is what happens when you go in and take somebody's wife, children, brothers, all of these things. This is what happens. By the way,
also doesn't distinguish between military and civilian casualties when they report these numbers.
Well, that's why I had another article here just in case someone here, we aren't in our full group today, but in case someone said, well, but a lot of civilians died. The reports of civilians dying that have been coming in from the Palestinian Authority, from Hamas, the Hamas, what is it called? Health, something like that, have been hugely inflated. And the UN actually recently had to admit that they've been going off numbers that are false. But one of the other things that I just wanted to make sure we included in this is that it's still, this poll has been done multiple times since the October attack, where they ask Palestinians, not Hamas military officials, but just Palestinians, do you think the October 7th attacks were justified? And the numbers either stay the same or get higher. It's like 70, 71, 72% of people, Palestinian, civilians, say they think they were justified. So I'm not saying all this to say like all Palestinians are evil or something like that. I think there are probably innocent
there are
people
Christian
there.
Palestinians as
Yeah.
well.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Although, like, what is a Palestinian is a, I don't know, philosophical question to ask.
It kind of is.
Because it's never been like a nation. It's kind of a group of people that seems like other nations don't want.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
I mean, that's the whole story. And I just feel like it needs to be said somewhere because it's not getting a lot of media attention. And it is a really amazing thing that 4 of these hostages were brought home. Sadly, the father, did you hear this? That the father of one of them, my gosh, like hours before, he had just, the father of one of the men had been so distraught about his son being taken hostage that he had just like lost something like 40 something pounds and he just was in, he wasn't doing well and he died just hours before. Oh my gosh, wow. It makes me feel choked up to say it. I mean, they went to tell him that his son had been rescued and found him dead.
Oh man.
It's awful. But the reason why that breaks your heart is because this is not how it's supposed to be, right? I mean, I guess I'm maybe this is because I'm a woman, but when I hear these stories about people being taken hostage, I automatically, maybe you guys do this too, but I automatically just think, well, if it were my daughter and son or loved ones that were taken hostage, I would burn that place down to find them. And I would not be sad that the people held them hostage for months died.
It's definitely a parent's worst nightmare. It's even worse than them dying in a car wreck or something like that.
100%.
Because the idea of what could be happening to your child is just enough to drive you absolutely insane. And so what these people have gone through is, yes. And I think, in the Bible, kidnapping is a death penalty offense. But it's kind of interesting. And we're trying to go through the Bible in a year in our Sunday school class. And we're in, 2 Samuel, I think. And there are all these events that I'm not very familiar with that are kind of shocking. One of which is that David commissions a census, and we're kind of talking as to like why that was wrong.
The angel of the Lord comes and wipes out a bunch of people.
70,000. 70,000. And it's not like a big battle. It's just like God is unhappy that he now. I think that God is unhappy. I think that the problem with the census is that it's basically you're saying to yourself, what are my resources so that I can go accomplish something, like go win a war or something?
Correct.
Okay. Whereas God is saying, trust me, I got you. Like, if you want to take this land, we'll take the land. If like you need to defeat this enemy, we'll defeat the enemy. Don't worry about it. Doesn't matter if you have 100,000 men or 5,000 men
it's
or
like
one
Gideon
man.
Story. Yeah.
So, but anyway, it's like, God himself, you said it's like tragedy when there's the death of any person. It's like, well, when you read the Old Testament, like God, there are lots of people who die, where God is well aware that they're going to die, and God in fact causes their death, and
God causes every person's death.
Well, yes.
This is what happens when you have a neo-Calvinist on the show.
Yeah.
We should do one explaining what that means.
We should.
What's interesting about that story is David is given a choice as to what he wants to happen.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. There's these 3 tiers. He says, do you want to be driven before your enemies? Do you want to have a plague, or do you want the hand of the Lord? I forget what the exact 3 categories
I think that's
are.
Right.
and it's for like a year or a week or a month or a week. And David says, well, I will let the hand of the Lord come upon it, because who knows, the Lord might be merciful. Oh. And that's actually apparently the merciful option. Oh. But we do have to remember, if David has this attitude, then a lot of people in Israel obviously also have this attitude. So we don't know that it's 70,000 random innocent people that God is judging. This is literally direct angelic intervention. Could be just as likely that these are the same people that are thinking that they are idolatrizing the military-industrial complex of Israel, or worshiping these false idols, and God is bringing judgment upon them in that sense. But the point stands that death is something that happens in the world. And when we have somebody like an expert at urban warfare at West Point University saying that actually Israel is carrying out perhaps the most effective, humane, and safe urban warfare campaign that has ever been waged, and nobody's talking about that.
That was one of the other articles I brought.
Yeah, it's like 1.5 civilians.
1 to 1.5, but it may actually be as low as 1 to 1.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean,
it's unheard of.
And again,
it's like, not good that their civilians are dying, but when it's normally 1 to 9, or something like that.
But Hamas surely counted the cost, right? As a wise man once said. On October 7th, Hamas said, "We're going to do this thing, and we're going to war game, right? The secondary and tertiary responses. That's the theme of the day, I think. What's going to happen? Israel's going to respond in this way, and then we're going to respond in this way, and then we're going to do this thing in the north, and then this is going to, you war game this out.
I think and 72% of people say they'll do it again.
Right?
Hamas has been really savvy in working the social media angle on this.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, gosh,
Arguably, they've won the war. I mean, and it's like going back to the Lafayette Park, where Free Gaza is spray painted on our national monuments. What does any of this have to do with anything? Or the really cynical play is that, Michigan with its,
Dearborn, Michigan.
Dearborn, Michigan, like the most concentrated Muslim city, I think,
the only
in the
Muslim
country.
Majority city in the United States.
Okay.
Yes.
And then Somali, in Minnesota, there's a lot of concern that they are going to turn out not necessarily for Trump, but against Biden. And Minnesota is kind of becoming a swing state this election, and that could be devastating. So there's this cynical. There is concern that Biden is holding back Israel. That he is basically, hegemonically saying to Israel, "Hey, chill on the, don't be, let's be nice to the Palestinians as long as possible, so that I can win the election. Because if we go full scale, if we just continue to go into Palestine and do all this damage and kill all these civilians, and the word of that gets out, then these people in these 2 states are not going to vote for me, and I will lose the states and I will lose the election."
And by the way, what are we doing about the American hostages? Like, was it Brittany Griner or whatever?
Yes, Brittany Griner
into Russia.
Yes,
and she's on the U.S. women's basketball team again.
Yes, but Caitlin Clark isn't.
Not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just during the big Black Lives Matter movement after George Floyd, we heard all of the say their names, right? When people would die, tragic deaths, and there's. I don't need to get into all of the stuff behind the say their names thing, but there is something lovely about remembering those that have been lost. And yet, how many Israelis died and no one's saying their names? I mean, their families are, but what are we doing about these? I cannot believe that these hostages are still over there. And we're like, well, we should just have a ceasefire. What in the actual...
Well, so now it's gone so far as that there are European countries for the first time recognizing Palestine as a political entity. They're saying, we recognize the state of Palestine. So that's the lesson, I guess. Kill the most Jews since the Holocaust, and you too can receive political independence.
Yeah. Well, I would like there to be no war. That would be ideal. Maybe there will be that place, but sometimes you have to defend yourself. So I would say that's what Israel is doing.
Take us to our last...
Well, I thought that this was helpful, basically, as a way of thinking about how we think about things, I guess. This was just simply a Twitter post by Jordan Peterson. And I'm not some huge Jordan Peterson guy, like the lobsters and the sit up straight and the clean your room and all that. Whatever. I mean, I think I'm
not
not
like his icon jacket. Evan?
It's all right. I mean, it's whatever. I mean, he's a smart guy. I'll take the good when I get the good.
It's kind of disgusting, actually.
I don't know what an icon jacket is.
Oh, I'll Google it for you here.
Okay. I mean, I've seen him wearing an ugly jacket. I don't know the significance of it.
I know he only eats meat. But anyway, continue.
Anyway, so there was an Instagram.com/facts, which makes it a news story article. This was a post. It was an article. And this seems to be another trend, which is the normalization and the celebrating of, the dinks, the double income, no kids, and the freedom that affords. It's been going on for several years now. But there was an article that basically said people without children tend to be happier than, those with children. And so there is this, again, a kind of gaslighting campaign, I would say, that basically says, yes, it's better to not have kids because of the lifestyle that it affords. You can sleep in, you can do drugs, you can
do drugs.
You can go to
Sorry,
concerts.
I like how it goes from sleep in to do drugs.
Well,
continue.
And by that, it might just mean smoking a little pot here and every now and then. But,
yeah.
But so one of the things that I've said to our Sunday school class, and whenever we've talked about apologetics, I talked about this with Ken a couple of episodes back, is basically listen for value-laden words. In fact, last night at our event, the Christian Nationalism, there were so many times where value-laden words were said, and I think the question needed to be asked, well, like by what standard? Because I think like when a libertarian goes around saying, well, this is good or this is bad or da-da-da-da, it's like, well, yes, but.
Like the word hobbit was bandied about a lot, surprisingly.
Yeah. Anyway, so when people say things like people without children tend to be happier than whatever. So what Jordan Peterson does really well is he simply responds by asking a lot of questions, about that article. So question number 1, says who?
Right. Who was polled?
Yes. Who is asking the question and who was asked the question? Measured how?
I guarantee it was not people at the end of their lives.
Yes.
That had never had kids that say they were happier.
So let's just like flesh this out. I have 2 kids. You have 2 kids. Yep. Austin's, Lord willing, on his way to having 6 children. We need lots of little Freemans running around here, bro. So people who really think and are Christians and all that. Anyway, good Presbyterians. Okay, but so everyone who's had kids, or even if you have little nephews and nieces running around, it's hard. Like it can be frustrating. You don't always get sleep. There's a whole level of anxiety that's just plopped onto your head. I tell people when I had kids, I realized it's like the first 24/7 job you have. Like when you work an 8-hour shift and you're done, it's like you go home, whatever. Yeah. But like when you have kids like that never goes away. Like you're always on, because they could get up at any moment.
They could,
yeah. So there is definitely all of that, the concern about, your kids getting kidnapped, or, how they do in school and the money. I mean, they cost money. You got to pay the hospital for them. You got to buy food for them. You got to pay the baseball fees.
They insist on eating like every day.
Every few hours.
Sometimes, yeah.
So, but they also bring you great joy.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the secondary, tertiary thing all over again. So there is like a cost. There is a cost benefit, analysis that you have to do. There is a cost to having children, and there's this benefit as well, though. So the question is, well, what are the costs, and are there greater benefits? I can imagine someone being 25 years old, thinking they're going to be young and beautiful forever, thinking they're going to be able to, walk upstairs without back pain forever, thinking to themselves, I make a lot of money. I can go buy whatever I want. I have all the time as my own. I can go see the world.
Minimal responsibilities.
Yeah. I can see them going, I can see doing this for another 10 years.
Yeah.
And maybe forever, and thinking that they'll really be happy. But reality will set in at some point where you'll look back and you'll say to yourself, I was kind of selfish those years and now it's too late. Now I'm not fertile anymore. My back hurts.
This feels personal. Does your back hurt today, Evan?
Well, I like once you're like mid 40s, like you get back pain for no good reason. It's like, where did that come from?
By the way, you said something about, but there's all these costs, but we have them and we love them and they make us happy. But even when kids don't make us happy, they are still good for us. They are still a blessing. They are still, they develop our character and they sanctify us and they help literally build the world.
Yes.
And then, of course, we put out into the world, hopefully, other image bearers that are hopefully also being salt and light for Christ.
Part of your legacy, not in a terribly bad way.
Right.
It's fulfilling the great, the first great commission of being fruitful and multiplying. And so you're kind of co-participating with this beautiful act of creation. So you're fulfilling a divine mandate. And there is a difference. It's a little bit superficial, and our resident C.S. Lewis expert can maybe help make the distinction. But there is a difference between the momentary pleasure and happiness of doing something you enjoy, and the true joy that you have with
Well, that's kind of
overriding
gets.
concerns.
Are you going to read all of these? Because the last three I thought were really interesting. So when
let's
you
go
read
through it.
Read them slowly.
So the first one is says who, right? So
these are the questions that are being asked of this poll. Okay.
2, measured how? Like how do you measure being happier? What?
It's a 7.
Yeah. Over what time span? That would be, like I said, you can be 25 years old.
Yeah.
And then, but over 20 years, like all of that could change, you know?
Sure.
Compared to who and when? Number 4. Number 5, happier or more hedonistic and immature, right? So in other words, the word happier is a value-laden word. So you have to say, when someone uses a value-laden word, you have to stop and say, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
You know, so is happier the same thing as being hedonistic and being immature, or is happiness some deep fulfillment and joy? Which would be more the Christian context, I would say. Who funded the research, quote unquote? Well, that's important because follow the science. I mean, by the way, I mean, a whole story that we could do is all of the admissions that Fauci is making now.
Yeah.
I mean, just one after another about the social distancing, about the mask, about the vaccine. Like everything they said is basically untrue. This was said in a deposition that he did several months ago that sort of leaked out. And then in his testimony before Congress last week. I mean, so like research and science, these are all things we have to be skeptical about now. And if you're not skeptical about these things, I hate to be this person, but you need to be paying more attention. I'm sorry.
You know what Chesterton says?
What did he say?
Of course.
He says, without education, we would be in terrible danger of taking educated people seriously.
That's interesting.
So in other words, we need to be educated.
We need to be smart enough to question.
To be skeptical.
Yeah.
I have to, it takes me a minute sometimes. Okay. So who funded the research? You know, if the Kinsey Foundation funded it, that might be something to take note of. There's a famous saying, lies, damned lies, and statistics, right? So statistics are made to be manipulated. So be careful of polls and whatnot. He says one phrase, replication crisis, which is basically the demographic bomb that's going off all over the world, which is fueling so much of the immigration issues that we have going on, which is causing these secondary and tertiary effects. I'm just going to keep saying that until someone shuts me up. Number 9, meaning and happiness are not the same thing, but the former trumps the latter.
Say that again slowly.
So meaning and happiness are not the same thing, but the former trumps the latter.
In other words, meaning is more important than happiness.
Yes, meaning is better than happiness. Happiness can be a fleeting thing. It's not a bad thing necessarily, but you might be fooled into thinking that it is the same thing as the deep fulfillment that is God's calling on your life, I would say. And so you as a mature thinking person that you're called to be, you have to be able to distinguish between the things that are fun and exciting, like riding a roller coaster, and the things that like are deeply fulfilling, like growing tomatoes.
Oh my gosh, sorry.
Did I say
You're
that
going to have
right?
to start having taking a drink every time you refer to our farming or having chickens. By the way, these last 3 things he says could be applied to so many things, right? Marriage, education, music, beauty, all of these things. But continue.
Responsibility and happiness are not the same thing, but the former trumps the latter.
Responsibility trumps happiness.
Yep. And adventure and happiness are not the same thing, but the former trumps the latter.
I thought that was an interesting one. Adventure.
Exactly.
Trumps.
I mean, having a family is an adventure. I mean, you don't know what's gonna, and there's no manual for it. So you're figuring out kind of day by day, and which is cool to frame something as normal as having a family and kids as an adventure. You know, I appreciate that because. I mean, happiness can be, in the drug den, with a shot of heroin in your veins, right?
I test my students on this. When I taught at the classical school, I would ask the 9th and 10th graders this sometimes when we were in seminars. I would say, well, why not just go and take a bunch of drugs and feel great?
Yep.
Like, what's wrong with that? None of them were satisfied. None of them would say that was a good life. And I challenged them to explain to me why that would be the case. I think actually Peterson's phrasing here in these last 3 about meaning, responsibility, and adventure, he's implicitly contrasting these with happiness as an emotional feeling rather than with what Aristotle or the classical tradition would say is a fully orbed, good, flourishing life. Right? The good life, eudaimonia, the deeper happiness would include meaning, responsibility, and adventure. It would not be something that you would have to talk about trumping one or the other. They would be elements of And then these last two, he says, if social or educational psychologists conducted the study, ignore it. If people who hate children or do not have them conducted the study, dismiss it. Now, I understand the second one. Study by people who hate children reveals that children suck. Right? Like, that makes sense.
Witch's study says children are delicious.
Yeah, so the social educational psychologist, this is something that more people might not be as aware of. If you, listeners, if you or your family members are interested in teaching and you are thinking about majoring in education, run away. Education is the worst possible thing that you can major in or specialize in. If you
remind me what you do again.
I am an educator, so I see this from the inside.
Yeah,
it is so ideologically driven, and it is what we call constructivism rules the day, and constructivism is going to lead people to say, well, I want to construct my own values. We should not impose a certain set of values upon the children. We should instead create a space for them to sort of self-determine what they want their own values to be. And it's been going on long enough now that the social educational psychologists grew up in that environment, and they've determined that their value is they don't want to have any kids. Because for whatever reason, Chelsea Handler, whoever it is that gets online every once in a while and talks about how fantastic it is to be alone.
Don't go into too much detail there. Yeah. Well, I think that'll about wrap it up. But I just like the way that he just simply asks questions, and I would say that that's a good apologetic method. I think it's a interesting way to converse with other people. I think if we simply learn how to ask some good, probing questions. And at presuppositional questions, but just simply trying to get to what someone believes and what they mean by the words that they say. I think we would do better than responding with defense, like I have kids and I love it. You're great. Then you just end up in a war with like a person that might be trying to defend something out of pain. Like maybe they can't have kids, so they're like, well, I'm happier anyway. So it's a delicate subject, but. Where can people find you, Austin? Because we're just about out of time.
Well, I am on Twitter and Facebook.
And as of just a few days ago, he's on the leadership page at theologybythepint.org because he has just joined our leadership team.
That's right.
Woo-hoo!
I plan to rule with an iron fist and shut everybody else out.
Listen, it's a benevolent dictatorship. You're lucky to be here. That's all I can tell you.
Yep. And I bet people can find you, Sarah, at theologybythepint.org.
Sure can. Same page. But at the top.
Yes.
Yeah.
Boss lady.
Actually, I think Paul Sloan's picture is first. I don't know why. But anyway. Evan, what about you?
I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran. And you can find me there, flhouston.org and Theology by the Pint. So that will do it for this week. Until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.